Number 10. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is a what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good, which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is, what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume, beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like, months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages. Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story, we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending, with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume, starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in Volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The What If uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got his Spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee as such becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office, sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include when you could have picked I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool.
Number 10. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? Okay, I have to start with this one as it's the very first issue of What If, released back in the late 70s. Now the Watcher breaks it down how these things work, how these what ifs work, as he will in the Disney Plus original this summer with the smooth voice of Jeffrey Wright to accompany the beautiful animation. Now he explains to readers in all of these issues that there are multiple realities. And the first one we get to explore is where Peter joins the first family to make some dough. And yes, of course, they call themselves the Fantastic Five. Because 4 plus 1 is 5. See, we're alright here, we're pretty good. The Bugle doesn't hate on Peter. He's actually loved and respected in this story. And it's a good start for the web slinger on this long what if journey, but it's about to get so much more dark. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy? Now issue 24 starts getting into the darker, but also kind of positive notes. See, instead of Spider-Man not catching Gwen with his webs, he ended up jumping off the bridge himself to rescue her. And then after that, well, love is in the air. She's alive. Things are obviously much more positive. He proposes, he reveals his identity to her. Things are looking quite nice. They're so good. And on top of that, Harry and Norman reunite. Harry found out about his father's secret identity and put his life on the line in order to save his father. So they worked it out as well. So far it's like yes and yes. So far so good. Now when Peter and Gwen get married at the ceremony, they're doing the cha-cha slide, drinking some champagne, having a great time, and then J. Jonah Jameson just waltz in with a bunch of police officers with footage that reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Also, what a dick. Like, that day? Do it tomorrow. Do it the day before. I don't know. The wedding? Not nice. Now this was the same tape that brought Norman and his father together, and it's the same tape that made Peter have to run for the rest of his life to protect the ones that he loves. It starts good, ends bad. Classic Peter. Number 8. What if Uncle Ben had lived? Okay, still in volume 1, now in issue 46, we see another positive scenario unfold, or rather it starts that way. Yeah. So Uncle Ben didn't suffer from back pain in the storyline, or sciatica or anything like that. He just slept comfortably that fateful night, which is great, but some things still have to happen. So instead of him going downstairs to check on that noise, it was Aunt May. So Aunt May ended up biting the bullet instead, and this changed the dynamic for Peter and Uncle Ben. I mean, obviously. See, Uncle Ben and Peter were quiet. Peter was for sure closer to May before she died, and when Ben figured out that Peter was Spider-Man, he actually encouraged him to continue and be there for the helpless, rather than, you know, just doing it out of some tortured sense of misplaced responsibility. So Spider-Man becomes better and more confident, which is a great sign. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it does wonders for our channel over here at Top 10 Nerd. Thank you so much for your constant support. Let's get right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more of your precious time, although I'm still doing so. Let's go back in. Number 7. What if Spider-Man had kept his 6 arms? Okay, what if volume 2 issue 42? We're getting into the weirder what ifs now. And it shows us what the world would look like when Spider-Man from Earth 92-100 keeps his extra 4 arms. Now the trick to this problem originally was in Michael Morbius's blood, but in this what if, it shows us that Morbius never actually made it to Dr. Connor's lab. Instead, Peter just stuck with these arms. He had no choice. Now eventually he tries to figure out something. He goes to the Xavier mansion for help. They all attack him because, you know, they don't recognize him. He has 6 arms and he's aggressive and upset. So Peter leaves them too. He's like, damn. So now he's bummed about this mutation even more, but he's easily able to stop Dr. Octopus. So that's, you know, that's a nice positive out of all this. Now things finally get easier for Peter when Mr. Fantastic surprises Spider-Man with Electro Vibra arms that will make his extra arms invisible, so he can at least blend in. That's progress, that's fair. Number 6. What if Spider-Man had kept his cosmic powers? Okay, in my last video I talked about these alternate powerful versions of Spider-Man, and amongst them was this Captain Universe version. So Spider-Man doesn't have these powers for too long, but in What If Volume 2 issue 31 we see a world where he remained the most powerful being. Now he starts off retiring. I mean, first of all, he wants a normal life. So Venom, of course, knows that he cannot beat this cosmic Spider-Man no matter what, so he agrees. He agrees to take over for the Webhead after his retirement. So far, this is pretty wild. Peter enjoys retirement for a little bit, but in the end, he still feels like he has to help humanity. Now, at one point, he tries to demand Thor to make it rain to fix famine in all these drought-ridden lands, but Thor refuses as his oath doesn't allow him to do such things. They end up having a cosmic battle in space. Spider-Man literally punches him off the planet to start it off, and it's wild. They're both so powerful. Now finally, Dr. Doom shows up. Well, we think it's Dr. Doom, but it's actually a Doombot. So the Doombot shows up offering to help get rid of Pete's problem, and it works. It works so well, in fact, that the spider powers leave too, and Peter is finally able to retire and have a daughter with MJ. Now at the very end, they look into her eyes, and they're all white. So MJ jokes and says, "Oh, she's got her father's eyes. How lovely. Now she's a god that you have to deal with." Enjoy. Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? What if Volume 2, Issue 4? We see a darker turn of events with Peter in that new black alien suit. Now we see a world where the sonic blast didn't break the two of them apart. They just stayed together, and then trouble happens. The symbiote claims that Spider-Man and him are now one, and Reed Richards couldn't detect the symbiote for days because Spider Sense and the symbiote's camouflage powers, he was like, good luck, zoom, disappeared. Now the symbiote ends up ripping through the Avengers, and due to the fact that Peter was stuck with the symbiote problem, he couldn't save S.H.I.E.L.D. agents like he normally would. They ended up biting the bullet because of this, and then Peter ended up losing 50 years of his life trying to deal with this. He ended up dying of old age just on the ground. It's dark, but it's a really good what if. Number 4. What if Spider-Man had a Spider-Girl? What if Volume 2, Issue 105, Mayday Parker has another chance of life rather than, be written out. Now this takes place years after her father Peter retired. Now Mayday Parker began getting powers of her own when she was around 15 years old, and when Normie Osborn stepped up as the new Green Goblin, she stepped up as the new Webhead. She found an old outfit that belonged to Ben Reilly and became Spider-Girl. Now the issue did so well that Marvel launched its own universe to continue these stories. Now it's called the MC2 universe. Number 3. What if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Ooh, it's dark. Written by Richard Howell, Volume 2, Issue 17. Now this one is dark, obviously by the title you know what's gonna happen, but it's really compelling. What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete in the streets, he's patrolling the city when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven, and just like that, he unloads a beating. He kills Peter, and then to celebrate, he eats a bunch of spiders, and then suits up in his clothes. Like, what a weirdo. What a monster. So now he's Spider-Man. He's the captain now. Okay, cool. Now what's step 2, you freak? At the same time, MJ is approached by a couple of thugs on the street, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Now MJ can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't even recognize her, first of all, and the way that he's fighting these guys is just brutal. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. So Captain America, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what is going on with the wall crawler. Now they did a decent job wearing down the beast, but still they needed more power. So he ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? I guess. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. This Spider-Man is indeed not the same. So that's one scenario that happens. Spider-Man's identity's out, which sucks. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing that news, and now she's messed up for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public either at this point. So the story ends up with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter can't catch a break in any of these universes. Number 2. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? One of my favorite what ifs. This is so amazing. Okay. What if issue 19, written by Peter Gillis? We see a life for Peter if he decided to take out his uncle's killer in that moment instead of, letting him get away and then the rest of his life happening the way it did. So what if Spidey was Spider-Man but just for the fame? What if he just wanted to be a famous dude? Go get the TV news people, he says. Also, TV news people, that's a funny way to put it. Now he's the big dog in town. He just wants to brag about how he takes down these criminals. He even refers to Flash as a nobody, which I mean, words hurt, Peter. Like, you don't call somebody a nobody. That's pretty rude. And then he goes on the Johnny Carson show to be the cool cat in town, where it's revealed on the show that John Jameson, American astronaut, had died upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. And then JJ is heartbroken that the real heroes have to die instead of these costume clowns just kicking their feet back, talking shit on talk shows, So Peter realizes what matters most by the end of the story, thankfully. But having Flash call a nobody, it's honestly worth the read for all the bad stuff that happens. Number 1. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Okay, this one is jam-packed. We have 3 different scenarios to enjoy, and this is one that I definitely left this one for number 1 for a reason. It's so good. I mean, first of all, like I said earlier, who wouldn't want to be Spider-Man? You probably imagined it to yourself when I said it. What would you do if you were Spider-Man? Would you go for the fame? Would you kind of lay low? Would you take out criminals in like a cool way? Would you tell your family? Would you make a Twitter? Would you I am Iron Man it and just tell everybody? Well, in What If Volume 1, Issue 7, back in the late 70s, we see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson all get their shot at being the web slinger, and it's way harder than I thought it was gonna be. So Flash gets bit and he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and you know, he's maybe a little bit too harsh, not gonna lie. And then he decides, oh, you know what, I'm pretty good at fighting people, I'm gonna take a crack at professional wrestling. But due to his super strength, he accidentally kills a guy doing this. The Vulture has an easy time taking him on as well, so it's not really the best in any scenario. And then Betty Brant is now up next. Now her costume is pretty sweet. It makes for great photo shoots, apparently. But while she was making TikToks, she ran out of web fluid, and when a thief ran by and got away, she had no web stuff. She couldn't do anything. She was like, I used my powers. I'm out for the day. See ya. And that thief was the one who took Uncle Ben's life. And then next up is JJ's son, John Jameson. While his outfit was pretty on point, his judgment was not. He wasn't good at the superhero life, and he died trying to stop a space shuttle from crashing. So we like ending on fun notes here at Top 10 Nerd.
Number 10. What if Captain America were revived today? 1983. Because there's another one of these from like, I think 1994, so yeah, but that's in volume 2. We're going to volume 1. There are actually a few different stories involving Captain America being revived in the modern day or simply evolving with time as it passed. So 1994, and I think there's also another one of them, which might even be on this list. But in this What If from volume 1, issue 44, we get a darker take on what a modern day Cap could look like in the 80s. This version of the hero ends up turning America into a heavily monitored and policed country during his witch hunt for communists. Fortunately, as dark as that all is, we learn that this isn't the real Captain America but an imposter that took his place after he went MIA. The real Cap returns and battles it out with imposter Cap, but in the end, the real Captain America turns to the people of America to undo all the damage done. He asks them to take responsibility, as while they were led to this point by a false version of him, they also allowed themselves to be led falsely. It's honestly a really good speech that even today rings true in a lot of ways, at least for me, and it provides the silver lining and shining hope for an otherwise pretty dark tale. Little grains of hope, that's all we need. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more What If lists, be sure to let us know by giving this a thumbs up, sharing it, doing all the things. Also, if you want more What If content, we do have a playlist now for that. Yay! Number 9. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? This very chaotic and fire-filled demon horde-infested story comes to us from What If Volume 2, issue number 6. And we are starting it off hot, friends. This is quite a dark story. Here we get to imagine what the fate of the world would have been like had the X-Men failed in defeating Madeline Pryor during the events of Inferno. Instead, she and Sim take over the planet Earth, unleashing hordes of demons on it and ruling it together. However, the heroes who have survived their reign of terror manage to band together and, using their power, fight back. In the end, they do win the day, but not without casualties. Wolverine himself in the story ends up becoming the pet of the Goblin Queen, and Sim fully giving in to his feral rage and feeding on the innocent. Ooh. He only becomes free from the fog of his rage after he kills Kitty Pryde tragically and realizes the monster that he has become. Number 8. What if Wolverine killed the Hulk? In issue 31 of the 1977 What If series, we find out what would happen if instead, when Wolverine first met the Hulk, he had killed him. Wolverine goes on to celebrate his victory against the big green Goliath after killing him, having some drinks and throwing some punches like he usually does at the local tavern. However, in the end, things get out of hand and he accidentally kills one of the patrons in a rage. When he seeks help from the military to protect and defend him, they actually turn their back on Wolverine, and so he ends up joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He becomes a sleeper agent for Magneto, infiltrating the X-Men. However, when Magneto finally plans on enacting his plan to defeat and capture the X-Men, Wolverine has a change of heart, feeling as though he has truly found acceptance and a family with the mutant team of heroes. He battles Magneto one-on-one, and the two kill one another in the end. It's a pretty tragic tale. Basically, all what ifs with Wolverine I feel like are usually pretty sad. Pretty sad or pretty dark. Number 7. What if Captain America had not vanished during World War II? See, another Captain America story because I love these. This story comes to us from issue 5 of volume 1, aka the 1977 What If series. While Captain America does not get trapped in the ice and Bucky never goes missing, presumed dead, only to become brainwashed and repurposed by the Soviet Union as the Winter Soldier, a worse fate seemingly awaits both of these heroes. Neither having ever disappeared, Steve goes on to fight as Captain America until he eventually retires from the mantle, becoming instead the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Bucky ends up taking his place, becoming the new Cap, as we have also seen happen in modern comics, and Rick Jones ends up becoming Buck's new sidekick, also going by the mantle of Bucky. Because I guess Rick or Ricky just doesn't have the same zing to it? Sadly though, Cap Bucky ends up dying on a mission, and Sharon Carter, Agent 13, who had hoped to settle down with Bucky after his final mission, blames Steve for his death. She actually accuses him of robbing him of his childhood and putting him in danger. Pretty intense. And then of course it ends with Rick volunteering to become the new Cap, so the deadly cycle it seems is destined to still continue in this timeline. You'd feel like after that all happened, Steve might be like, maybe we won't do that again, it didn't go great the last time. But he's just like, ah yes, Rick Jones, now you will be Captain America and probably die. What if the Green Goblin stole the Infinity Gauntlet? This story comes to us from the What If Infinity Dark Reign one-shot. Here we see Green Goblin dealing with a lot of family drama and trauma from his past. He steals the Infinity Gauntlet and not only uses it to defeat, well, all the heroes of planet Earth and beyond, but it's also revealed that his true motivation for doing all of this and pretty much everything that he's done is to win his father's approval. His father, who was always so unimpressed and who for a long time mistreated him, pushing Norman towards greatness or else. When Norman showcases his villainous accomplishments, it only causes his father to revile him even more though. Norman then decides to use his Infinity Gauntlet to snap and influence his father, making him proud of him instead. But this makes his father's love and approval feel pretty empty, especially when Norman learns that his altered dad actually really only loves him just because he's his son, and not for all that he has accomplished. Which you would think would be really nice, but to Norman he's like, that's infuriating, I hate that. Norman erases his father from existence, and in so doing, erases himself. Don't you hate when that happens? Number 5. Marvel Zombies Resurrection. While not an exact What If series, Marvel Zombies Resurrection definitely feels like a what if version of the Marvel Zombies world that imagines a completely new scenario involving zombies based on established Marvel lore, where Galactus becomes infected with a mysterious new virus that it turns out was created by the Brood, dun dun dun, to infect people more efficiently, turning them instead into zombies. The whole series from 2020 and the intro to it from 2019 that kind of explains all of the lore that you need to know to jump in is all pretty bleak, with only a few people on Earth making it out alive in the end, and still fighting basically just to survive after the world has pretty much been completely infected after Galactus' corpse is hurled to the Earth to be used as a kind of zombie creating bomb. But while the story is pretty dark in terms of all the great heroes that we lose, do not worry, at least Carol's Flerken cat Chewie stays safe. Thank goodness. In case like me you read this and you were worried the whole time about that little fur baby, I was like, no, please don't let Chewie die, Chewie's so cute. Chewie is also a badass, so really there's no need to worry. Chewie's like one of the best fighters in this entire series, which I love. Number 4. What if Clint Barton killed Norman Osborn during Dark Reign? This what if comes answered in the What If Dark Reign one-shot. Here we get to see what could have happened had Clint Barton's plan to kill Norman Osborn actually come together. Clint himself ends up making a martyr out of Osborn though, unfortunately, and becomes a wanted man in the process. One civilian decides to take the matter of justice into his own hands, calling out the assassin, Clint Francis Barton. And if he doesn't show himself, he threatens to blow up the entire Sunday Inn and all the innocent people that are inside it. Hawkeye does show up though and attempts to talk the man down, but surprisingly the man pulls a gun and shoots Clint point blank to death rather than surrender. He is taken away, and in the end Hammer remains in control under Deputy Director, likely now full director actually, Victoria Hand. Basically if Hawkeye had actually killed Norman Osborn, it would be bad, I think, in the long run. I think that's what we learned. Number 3, what if the Kingdom of Cain? In What If issue 94 out of the 1989 series, also known as Volume 2, we get to visit a world destroyed by the Sentinels. Oh goody. The Sentinels did not only take out all of mutant kind supposedly, but also killed all of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, and its general population of non-powered individuals who were killed by high levels of radiation that the Sentinels emitted. The only one to survive all this destruction is Juggernaut, who wanders the Earth for years reminiscing on his past and all of his wrongdoings, and feeling unbearably lonely all the while. Poor Juggernaut. Magneto shows up and confirms that everything that has come to pass is Juggernaut's fault because he killed Professor X, which was basically the catalyst event for this chain reaction of destruction that has now come to pass. Juggernaut finds and kind of falls into a secret bunker as a result of his fight with Magneto, where he learns that some mutants survived and are actually hiding out. Yay! When they ask him to leave them be though, he refuses, only to learn that this was an attempt to protect themselves against the radiation, which he is now let in by breaking into the bunker, infecting them and ultimately sentencing them to death. So, it's really sad. Juggernaut's like, I'm lonely, I just want to talk to you. And they're just like, you just killed us, so thanks for that. He's like, wow. I ruin everything, this is terrible. Number 2, what if the traitor? In this alternate tale that comes to us from the 1989 volume of What If issue -1, we get to see what would happen if Trevor Fitzroy went back in time to try and convince Professor X to never create the X-Men. Although Bishop travels back in time to try and stop Fitzroy, it doesn't end up working out. Fitzroy shows the Professor of the future to come and all the war and prosecution that mutants will suffer. When Professor X meets Bishop, he inquires of Jean's fate and learns that she perishes, but that he and his X-Men remain a symbol of hope for the people. Unable to accept the dark future that awaits, however, Professor X seemingly agrees, despite Bishop's pleas, to never let the X-Men form, and Bishop ends up being locked up in prison in the past, with both Fitzroy and Bishop believing the other is the traitor. But who's really the traitor? Number 1, what if Spider-Man Back in Black? This story reimagines what would have happened had MJ ended up being shot by the Kingpin's hitman instead of Aunt May. Mary Jane as such does not end up in intensive care hanging to life by a thread, but instead dies pretty much instantly. This makes Peter lose control, going into a dark rage unlike any we've ever seen. He doesn't just plan on scaring and potentially finishing the Kingpin if MJ dies, because I mean she's already dead, but instead he plans on just straight up setting out to kill whoever was responsible for the hit, which he of course does find out was still Kingpin in this reality. Donning his black costume, he heads out planning to put an end to Kingpin once and for all, despite Aunt May and Iron Man trying to stop him and calm him down. In the end, Peter succeeds in killing Kingpin, Aunt May basically disowns him, and Iron Man has him arrested for murder, citing the Superhero Registration Act. Peter blames Iron Man for all this mess, by the way, demanding a trial with a jury, and Iron Man denies any wrongdoing, claiming Peter made his choice.
And at number 10, Justice Riders. You know what sells? Cowboys, baby. Taking your characters and plopping them in a western setting is always a guaranteed money-making tactic. Sure, it's been done a million times, but in 1997 DC released Justice Riders, or in other words, a western Justice League composed of hootin' and hollerin' versions of Wonder Woman, Hawkman, Kid Flash, Martian Manhunter, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle, which is just the weirdest arrangement for a Justice League ever, but it's so cool. It's just wild. Obviously, to make the setting work, all the abilities of these heroes are turned way down, but in place of that, we got a quick drawing Martian Manhunter in a poncho and a big old hat, and Blue Beetle as a wacky scientist. It's super cool. With all the style you might expect, the story is just as wild as the Wild West it takes place in. It follows Sheriff Diana Prince as she puts together this team of heroes to take on Maxwell Lord, who left her town as a smoking stack of ruins. It's just a fun time and absolutely deserves a read from you. Number 9, Batman Dracula. Some of the coolest stories involve Batman, and I mean, let's be honest, Batman himself is one of the coolest heroes. He's also the most human, literally just being a regular human who fights among gods and aliens against some of the biggest threats to humanity, including vampires. And when he goes up against the baddest and biggest vampire, Dracula himself, Batman becomes more than a man. He becomes the most justice-driven, terrifying vampire you've ever seen, and it is dope. When Dracula comes to Gotham, a good vampire grants Batman the vampiric gift in order to take on Dracula himself, and the idea was so awesome that it became a whole trilogy, starting with Red Rain, then Bloodstorm, and ending in Crimson Mist, all of which put the most obvious hero to become a vampire in one of the best Victorian horror styles and with the most terrifying looks I have ever seen for The Dark Knight. Batman Dracula is truly one of the best versions of Batman ever, and 'tis all thanks to Elseworlds. Number 8. Green Lantern Earth 1. This Green Lantern focused story is one that I actually really like. It brushes over a lot of things very easily, but it made me care about the Green Lanterns, and that's something I didn't think was gonna happen. I don't really care about them normally, but in this one I do. It almost feels like a dark sci-fi take on Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns. Essentially, in this story, Hal Jordan is on the moon with a crew of workers who mine for metal when he comes across a crashed alien ship containing the Green Lantern ring, a Green Lantern battery, the corpse of Abin Sur, and a robot called a Manhunter. Hal claimed the ring, just taking it off the alien corpse, and used it to fight the Manhunter that sprung on him. What had happened is that the Manhunter robots were created by the Guardians of the Universe to take out the Green Lanterns as the Lanterns had grown uncontrollable, and they were pretty successful but also grew out of control, putting the galaxy in peril and leaving the Green Lantern core broken and spread extremely thin. Hal meets up with an equally inexperienced Kilowag, and they go across the universe trying to rally together any Green Lanterns they can. The best way I saw it described was as if Christopher Nolan and Ridley Scott teamed up and made a Green Lantern story. It feels like that, and it's just such a cool and fresh story. You should definitely check it out. Hey you nerds! I hope you're enjoying this video, but if you are, make sure you hit the like button so that we know that this is what you want to see and we can make more of it. Cool? Okay, cool. Moving on. Number 7. Justice League The Nail. This one is rather odd. It's kind of a Superman story, but without Superman. The premise is that the day that Kal-El crashed on Earth, the Kents drove over a nail and it gave them a flat tire, resulting in Superman just never becoming a thing. And it's all based off a little poem. The poem goes like this: For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. And for want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a nail. So essentially it's all about the butterfly effect, which is kind of what Elseworlds is all about in the first place when you really think about it. Wow, look at that, so cool. So, in this story, all the other heroes are here, but without that one central figure to embody their core values. Without that main leader, the world actually fears the Justice League. The world is constantly standing against them, and the story shows how they struggle with not only the villains of the DC universe, but even their own public perception, and it's all because Superman is out of the picture. As much as it feels like a big testament to Superman's importance, it does also show the strength of the other members of the League to a degree, which is nice because Superman is just kind of boring. Number 6. Luthor. But do you know what isn't boring? Lex Luthor's view of Superman, and that's what leads me to our next pick. Luthor is a brilliant inversion of the normal Superman story we are all used to. In this story, we get to see Metropolis, Superman, and the rest of the world through the eyes of Lex Luthor. And from his point of view, Superman is utterly terrifying. He's a menace that could destroy the world and the world Luthor has built beneath his burning alien gaze. It flips the whole thing on its head, and while it's relatively short, it does a lot in that small time, showing us the lengths to which Lex Luthor is willing to go to achieve his ideals, but it also tells pretty plainly why he would go to those lengths in the first place. This comic inspired the insanely good Joker story that is this one's spiritual successor, and for that alone, it definitely deserves praise. It's just nice to see a story from a perspective different to the everyday superhero story. Coming in at number 5 is Gotham by Gaslight. Gotham by Gaslight, like most Elseworlds stories, is just super freaking cool. It's such an obvious, brilliant concept. You take Batman, the greatest detective ever, and you plop him in the Victorian era and have him take on one of the most compelling unsolved serial killer cases in history, Jack the Ripper. But then, they go and make it even cooler by having Jack move to this really awesome Victorian Gotham City, and they give Batman and the Ripper a personal connection. The story even sees Bruce accused of being the killer himself, which adds yet another layer on top of everything else. Also, we have to talk about the incredibly cool art style in the comic, which came from Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy, and it just works perfectly in his Victorian setting. It's actually just a big old treat to read. Gotham by Gaslight was one of DC's most successful Elseworlds stories, and it even got a 2018 animated adaptation, but it has a completely different ending. Both versions are really cool and really entertaining, so just pick one. Number 4, Superman Red Sun. Probably one of the most beloved Superman stories ever. This story asks the question of what would happen if Kal-El had landed not in Kansas, but in the Soviet Union. Superman grows under the ideals of communism and is used by the Soviets as their weapon, helping bring almost the whole world into a super Soviet Union. It sees other heroic characters like Wonder Woman and Batman in this completely different world and really plays with the idea of freedom over security. It paints this Superman in a much darker light, as he will go to incredibly surprising lengths to achieve his goal of Soviet domination. He goes up against a Lex Luthor who becomes president of the United States, has Brainiac as a supercomputer assistant who eventually turns on him, and the end of the whole story? It's a truly mind-boggling experience to say the least. Also, just like Gotham by Gaslight, in 2020 we got an animated version of this story as well, and it's incredible. Oh, and fun fact, Superman Red Sun is real-life Superman Henry Cavill's favorite Superman story, which is really interesting. Like, could you imagine a Henry Cavill Superman Red Sun live action movie? Number 3, Kingdom Come. While a lot of the great Elseworlds stories deal with versions of specific characters, others deal with the whole DC universe of heroes and villains, and Kingdom Come is probably one of the best of them. Here, the classic heroes who made up the Justice League, they've all basically retired. New heroes have sprung up in their place, but they don't hold a candle to those who came before. They barely even care about saving people and cause a massive accident that takes out almost all of the Midwest of America. Superman has been convinced that the world wanted him to step down. Batman keeps Gotham in control using massive, powerful robots. Green Lantern sits in an emerald fortress above the earth just watching. The Flash has basically become the Speed Force and keeps his city safe by basically being everywhere all at once, existing in the time between seconds. It's almost as if the Justice League had retired and then all the corrupt heroes from the boys took their place, and then the retired heroes come back to correct everything. There's a lot more to it than that, with some really cool stuff going on in all different kinds of places. Kingdom Come is like a love letter to DC Comics by DC Comics, and it has some of the most beautiful comic book art you've ever seen. Coming in at number 2 is The Dark Knight Returns. Technically speaking, Elseworlds stories simply have to take place outside the normal DC continuity for them to count as Elseworlds stories, or they have to have that little watermark thing on it, but I'm changing the rules here. Which means that Frank Miller's globally appraised The Dark Knight Returns is an Elseworlds story, and that makes it one of the best ones. Set in the 80s, it actually tells the tale of an old, grizzled, militaristic Batman who comes out of retirement in the face of an American government that has become more and more dictatorial. He takes on a new Robin, he faces off against an old sadistic Joker, and Bats beats the absolute snot out of Superman in one of the most famous comic book fights ever. The unique style of the comic also just adds another layer to this work of art. Sure, the books that followed were kind of horrible in my opinion in comparison, and extremely odd, but the one that came first has a special place in so many people's hearts, and for good reason. And finally, in at number 1, The New Frontier. Most Elseworlds stories give us a world with some radical difference, usually that leaves the world worse for wear. Usually the horror of those worlds gives justifications for why heroes must become stronger, go to greater lengths, or show the fullest extent of their might in ways impossible when restricted by the regular DC canon. But in The New Frontier, we get a world that challenges the heroes to do good in a moral sense, to reach the fullest extent of their hopes and ideals rather than their physical limits, and all without losing track of what makes a story just so freaking good. It's a story about heroes who are worthy of being called that, who inhabit a world that wants so desperately to change for the better. It depicts the DC universe during a post-Korean War era, with superheroes outlawed by the government. It's also the beginning of the Space Age, which leads to the story being told from the perspectives of Hal Jordan and Martian Manhunter. Fans of Elseworlds think of this one as the most perfect. Each subplot is just as unique as the main story, and the characters are all fully realized with different arcs. It also gives a beautiful theme. The story is just about leaving behind a dark past and looking to the bright future. And like all the other great Elseworlds, there's also a movie, so you don't really have to actually read anything, which is always a good time.
Number 10, The Reaching Hand. The amount of bizarre deaths Jimmy Olsen has to suffer in alternate realities, my goodness. In this story featured in the Elseworlds 80-page giant from 1999, 1989, we see Bruce Wayne acting as a Lovecraftian detective aiming to unravel the mystery that is the alleged murder of Elongated Man. In reality, something far more dark and sinister has taken hold of the hero and is using him as its vessel to spread darkness throughout the city and take hold of other innocent souls. It reminds me a bit of the bizarre and campy 90s film Cast a Deadly Spell. Like most Lovecraft-inspired horror stories, this one ends with a foreboding cliffhanger. That face. I love that face. Bruce Wayne's face at the end, he's like, oh, what will happen? You're dead. You're gonna die. It's not gonna be good. Number 9. Teen Titans The Lost Annual. This strange story has a campy 60s feel to it. It was originally slated to be released in the early 2000s as an Elseworlds special for Teen Titans, but was later delayed. In the end, it was released in 2008, where it would be referred to in the title as a Lost Annual. But originally, it was intended to be an Elseworlds special, so I'm gonna count it. Here, the Teen Titans team up to try and save President John F. Kennedy, who has been kidnapped by space aliens and replaced by some kind of double. The whole adventure is pretty wacky, which honestly is what makes it so enjoyable. You know me, I love wacky adventures. Reminds me a bit of an original series Star Trek episode. And in case you haven't gathered by now, TOS is my favorite of the Star Treks, so yes. Although I am finally watching Discovery now, so I guess we'll see what happens. And before we move on to our number 8 spot, a quick thank you to all of you for joining me this list, and a reminder to click that like if you want more videos like this one. I personally love exploring Elseworlds with you, so I'd love to do more about it. Number 8. Elseworld's Finest, Supergirl and Batgirl. This one is kinda ridiculous, but also has some pretty powerful and epic moments. In this Elseworlds story, both Superman and Batman do not exist. Kal-El was destroyed before he could become Superman, though Kara Zor-El still made it to Earth. She took his place as Metropolis's hero, becoming Supergirl. Bruce Wayne never became Batman either, and instead Barbara Gordon guards Gotham as Batgirl, after her parents were murdered by accident instead of the Waynes, who were meant to be targeted. The two women join forces and take on a very sneaky Lex Luthor, who Supergirl had thought of as a close friend and ally initially, and a very jacked Joker. He's like really jacked, like more jacked than you could probably imagine. He's also wearing like a little gym outfit, which is just something. Number 7. A Nation Divided. This Elseworld comic, Superman: A Nation Divided, gives us a look at what Superman would be like if he was around during the Civil War and happened to be a Union soldier. In this story, Superman is known as Atticus Kent and ends up finding out he has superpowers during the Civil War. He quickly becomes the Union's new secret weapon and even takes both Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln on a little flight to give them a tour of the Capitol. I personally love when history and comics meld, and Elseworld stories that posit what if superheroes were real and part of historical events. So for me, this was an interesting story and one that I enjoyed. The whole story is told through letters of various historical figures as well as Kent himself. Number 6. Thrill Killer. Set in the 60s, this Elseworld stories follows a doomed Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson, aka Richard Grey Stark, which is his actual name here, although he still goes by Dick Grayson because comics. These two attempt to take on the Joker, who in this world is a woman known as Bianca Steeplechase. In the end, Robin is killed, but so seemingly is the Joker. Oddly enough, in this reality, it's actually Batwoman and Robin who end up inspiring Bruce Wayne to join them. He becomes Batman after Dick's demise. Barbara is also the one with the wealth in this Elseworld story. She is an heiress who became somewhat estranged from her father after the unsolvable murder of her mother. Barbara uses her wealth to purchase Wayne Manor, as in this reality, the Waynes actually lost their fortune during the Great Depression. Very period of them. Very period to lose all of your money during the Great Depression. Or now, during the Now Depression. Number 5. Red Rain. Red Rain has to be one of my all-time favorite Elseworlds tales. It also was an ongoing story that was told over the course of multiple graphic novels released throughout the 90s. In this story, Batman battles vampires but eventually succumbs to them when he is bitten and transformed himself into one of the creatures of the night. He still battles with his new monstrous nature, however, attempting to rebel against it. However, eventually the Joker pushes him too far, causing him to give into temptation and drink his foe's blood. I also like how this is rebel. This is like, get off my lawn, kids. I don't know why I do this when I say rebel. Batman attempts to make sure the Joker will never rise again as a vampire, but eventually it is revealed that he was somehow unsuccessful in preventing this from happening when we revisit this alternate Earth much later down the road. Fans of vampires are sure to also enjoy this world, but as a Batman fan, I also just love the extra layer of moral struggle that vampirism gives Batman. Number 4. Earth 3. Earth 3 is home to the Crime Syndicate, an alternate reality where instead of the Justice League members being heroes, they're villains, and instead of the Justice League, we have the Crime Syndicate. In the place of Wonder Woman on the team, we have Superwoman, an evil version of Lois Lane armed with her lasso of submission. Although I always like to think of it as a whip of submission, but that's something else. You guys can cut that. That might be too kinky. I don't know. I don't know if it's too kinky. You tell me. Internet, you tell me. The heroes of this alternate Earth favor strength above all, and as such only seek to dominate and rule those who they consider to be weaker than them. The Crime Syndicate themselves are composed of members Deathstorm, Owlman, Superwoman, and Ultraman currently, but evil versions of Aquaman, known on this alternate Earth as Sea King, and the Flash, known here as Johnny Quick, were also part of the team at a time. I miss Johnny Quick. R.I.P. Johnny Quick. You dead. Number 3. Elseworld's Finest. I mostly love this story for the art, to be honest. Elseworld's Finest is quite different from the previous story we had with no Superman or Batman, with Supergirl and Batgirl respectively taking their place. This title of this story and two-part limited series was initially based on the old comic series World's Finest, which featured the two heroes of Superman and Batman teaming up on the regular. Basically, it's their long-lasting BFF comic. In Elseworld's Finest, we see the heroes team up to go on an Indiana Jones style adventure, with Bruce rocking some pretty sweet supernatural and mystical armor. The two must work together to face an evil Russian Lex and defeat the villainous Ra's al Ghul in order to save the world and free Lana Lang's father. Number 2. Red Sun. One of the most intriguing Elseworlds when it comes to Superman, and in my opinion Lex Luthor for any Lex fans out there, is Red Sun. Red Sun comes to us from the Elseworlds imprint and aims to answer the question, what if Superman had been raised in the Soviet Union? The result is we get a passionate communist Superman who, instead of standing for truth, justice, and the American way, stands for socialism, Stalin, and acts as a champion of the common worker. Instead of an S on his chest, he wears the symbol of communism, the hammer and sickle. Red Sun was a story written by Mark Miller which offered us a different look at Lex Luthor as well, who became the president and sort of the hero of the USA, all as a part of his greater plan to satiate his obsession with destroying Superman. So in a weird way, Lex becomes sort of part hero as well as the recognizable part paranoid villain that we've all come to know and love. Number 1. Earth 1. Also known as Earth 1 with the number instead of the letters, so Earth 1 or Earth 1. But it's also confusing because there's multiple Earth 1s. When it comes to some of the DC multiverse, it can actually just get a little confusing in general, as of course there are various Earths that have the same number depending on the continuity we're talking about, New Earth or Prime Earth, not to be confused as well with Earth Prime. Yeah, it can get pretty mathy up in your brain if you're trying to keep track of everything and separate it. But this time around, when I'm talking about alternate Earths when it comes to the number 1, I'm talking about Earth 1, where all of our heroes are just starting out as seen in the Earth 1 series, like Batman Earth 1, Superman Earth 1, Wonder Woman Earth 1. You get the idea. There's a lot of Earth 1s. I like how I didn't talk about how it was interesting at all, I just talked about how it was confusing. Anyways, if you've read Earth 1 or any of those series, you know what I'm talking about. It's awesome. Enough said, apparently. Number 10. Superman Jr. is no more! Exclamation point. Remember that time that Superman Jr. quit? No? Well, you can if you read this Elseworld story. This is another Elseworld story out of the Elseworlds 80-page giant from the 90s. Seriously, this book is chock full of interesting and strange stories. In this one, Superman Jr. ends up quitting the superheroic game, much to Batman Jr.'s dismay, believing his dad will be around forever, so he's not needed. He's like, I quit, I'm over this. My dad's got this for life, for longer than life. I think you know where this is going next. Superman appears to die while taking a net full of dangerous missiles to safety in the emptiness of space to explode in. Supes Jr. then feels terrible, misses his dad, the whole world goes into a tizzy, and eventually Superman Jr. is inspired to return. I don't know if people use the word tizzy anymore, but I just did, so there you go. I'm making it a thing again. He helps Batman Jr. save some guys from an earthquake where they end up being trapped under tons of rock and snow. In the end, however, it's revealed that Superman faked his death in order to influence his son to return to his job as a hero, and everyone has a good laugh about it. Ha 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 ha! Oh, faking your death is such good fun. This story also features such amazing lines as Batguy/Bat Jr. I kid you not, he is called Batguy in this comic, asking Supes Jr., "What's the true poop on this?" And Superman Jr. responding with a rhyme. Rhyming on your father's grave, Superman Jr.? How distasteful. Number 9. DMT's rockumentary, The Lex Records Story. How about a story where we get the history of how Lex became the head of the most successful record label ever, representing all kinds of superheroic musician talent, and how he ended up selling the label to Darkseid. That is another story which comes to us from the Elseworld 80-page giant, and it is a delight. I promise I'm gonna have other stories that are not from this comic, but just let me get these out of the way, my friends. They're just so good. What a strange story this is. One wherein Superman is part of a superheroic Beetle-like group with Barry Allen, Green Arrow, and Aquaman. Oh, and he's the John Lennon of the group who is tragically killed. And I never knew I needed to see Martian Manhunter as a rock star, but I definitely did need that, and so do you. And before I move on to our number 8, if you are enjoying this list, be sure to let us know and show it by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here at Top 10 Nerd. Number 8. Superman/Batman. Absolute power! This comic is an interesting one. We are talking about a world in this story arc where Superman and Batman were reimagined as the only heroes. Both of their parents were wiped out at a young age, and Superman was never raised by the Kents. Instead, they were taken in and raised by Saturn Queen, Lightning Lord, and Cosmic King of the Legion of Supervillains. They created a fascist world which they collectively ruled with an iron fist, eliminating any and all opposing heroes who rose up or attempted to do so anyways. If you don't believe me, just look at the end of the first issue in this arc, which ends with Wonder Woman awakening and recruiting Uncle Sam. Yep, that's just how this story do. Number 7. Son of Superman. The 1999 Son of Superman tells a story where John Kent works alongside a group called the Supermen to discover the truth behind what really happened to his father, all as he's realizing just who his father really was, which his mom, Lois Lane, kept a secret, and as he's just realizing himself that he has superpowers. He doesn't even initially realize that Clark Kent and Superman were the same person, but initially instead suspects his mother was having an affair with the costumed hero Superman. Oh boy, John. In the end, they discovered that his father is still alive and had been kidnapped and held prisoner all these years by Lex Luthor with help from Martian Manhunter. Ooh, it does not look good on you, Martian Manhunter. It's not very nice. In the end, this plot is revealed, and despite John being new to heroics, he goes up against Lex, and the good guys end up prevailing. My favorite part, admittedly, is when John calls Lex's ponytail outdated. So 90s. Just gotta love that. Also, I just love that Lex has a ponytail in this. I also just love that this story ends with most of the older crew of Supes retiring, paving the way for a new era of supers like John himself. For me, Elseworld stories that end like this, I'm like, I wish this could be the way of DC. Just let some of these people retire. Let's get some fresh blood in here. We've got a lot of sons and daughters and such. Number 6. Batman in Darkest Night. All my Tales of the Dark multiverse fans out there are likely already familiar with this story, if not the original telling of it, then at least the dark retelling of it. You might know the version of Bruce Wayne from Earth -32, but for this multiverse story, we're talking about the version of Bruce that inspired him from the non-dark Earth, just Earth 32, no negatives needed. This version of Bruce is introduced to us in Batman in Darkest Night, a 90s comic that gave us an alternate story, one where Bruce Wayne, instead of becoming Batman, becomes the Green Lantern in Hal Jordan's place, being chosen by Abin Sur instead. In this reality, Sinestro becomes Green Lantern, Bruce Wayne's biggest foe, and the Joker never existed, as Green Lantern prevents the accident which created him at Ace Chemicals. Here, Catwoman is also Star Sapphire, which I honestly just need more artwork in my life of that whole thing. I'm just like, more Catwoman Star Sapphire artwork, please. Give it to me. Number 5. Batman/Captain America. This has got to be one of my favorite stories out there. It's the team up we've all been waiting for, Batman and Captain America together. I actually love when these two team up. Here we see them taking on each other's main nemesis, featuring Cap's Red Skull and Bat's Joker. There's also a bit of a sidekick swap where Cap partners with Robin and Batman partners with Bucky, and in the end, of course, even Joker admits that Red Skull is so evil, even he is not interested in working with him. He may be a criminal lunatic, but he is an American criminal lunatic. When it comes to German World War II soldiers, even Joker isn't interested in crossing that line. And in the end, he and Red Skull end up squaring off themselves and fighting one another as well, after Joker finds out Red Skull's true allegiance. I just love the Joker's like, I might be crazy, but like, this is too crazy for me. Not about that. Number 4. Batman / Houdini, The Devil's Workshop. For all my Gotham by Gaslight fans out there, here's another stylistically appealing Elseworlds story for you. This one evokes the feel of watercolors and also has some really pretty letters. It's really pretty to look at and features Batman teaming up with Houdini to fight vampires. What more could you want, I ask you? It also gives us a cool alternate Joker with Mad Jack Schadenfreude. The art is truly so good here, I must share with you the names responsible. Howard Chaykin and John Francis Moore are the writers, with art by Mark Chiarello and letters by Ken Bruzenak. Just a stunning read. You gotta check it out. Number 3. DC The New Frontier. Not only is this a beautiful world to get lost in, it is super stylized by the late and great Darwyn Cooke, who passed away in 2016. This Elseworld story paints our heroes as outlaws operating in the post-Korean War time period, where space is truly the new frontier. And being that it is, the story here is primarily led by protagonists and heroes Martian Manhunter and Hal Jordan. Also, I just gotta say, I love when Martian Manhunter gets to be like the main protagonist in a story. I feel like we don't hear enough from him usually. Maybe I just need to read more of his standalone series. Maybe that's what I need to do. The art style is simple and classic, and I also just really love the explosive use of color as well. It's a visually compelling series that I highly recommend checking out. Number 2. Earth 2. Earth 2 is home to many awesome heroes like Val-Zod, Superman, Power Girl, and Helena Wayne's Huntress. It is home to the superhero team known as the Wonders of the World, and while some of the original team is gone, we are introduced to new team members who take their place. And hey, we still got the golden oldie Alan Scott. I personally am just a big fan of both Power Girl and Helena Wayne and their team ups together, so Earth 2 for me, when it comes to alternate realities and worlds and their stories, has got to be one of my favorites personally. Number 1. Kingdom Come. Kingdom Come has to be one of the most beautiful Elseworld stories that takes us to an alternate future where there is a great divide and sort of war in the superhero community, following Superman's choice to retire. He does end up returning to the world of heroics at the behest of Diana, aka Wonder Woman. Kingdom Come was a story originally written by Mark Waid in response to a rise of anti-heroes in the comic world. And in the story, this is exactly what you see some of the classic heroes like Superman, Wonder Woman, and Alan Scott go up against. These new heroes whose ideologies are much more harsh and violent by comparison. Much more edgy. The artwork, of course, is done by one of the most amazing artists to this day in the biz, Alex Ross, and is all hand painted. We also get to end it with, of course, Superman and Diana becoming parents of like a cool baby, and then also they're like, hey Batman, you wanna also help us raise this super baby? I just love that. I love the three of them like parenting together. I think that's adorable. Number 10. Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger originally started appearing in a comic strip and would later receive his own comic book series in 1948, which went for over 100 issues. Before he was even in comics though, Lone Ranger was a superhero recognized for his radio show, which debuted in the early 1930s. The first few comics consist of compilations of his comic strips, but new stories began with Lone Ranger starting with issue 38, which saw Paul S. Newman writing and Tom Gill on art. The Lone Ranger was known as a mysterious masked Texan Ranger who would fight bandits and outlaws in the Wild West of America, with his loyal pal Tonto and his trusty steed Silver. Hi-ho Silver away! Number 9. Tonto. You didn't think I was going to talk about Lone Ranger and just like leave Tonto out of this list, did you? Tonto was originally shown as Lone Ranger's native partner and was part of the Comanche tribe originally. Some may think of him as just a sidekick, but as time progressed his character tended to be more presented as an equal and partner to the Lone Ranger rather than just a sidekick. He got his own comic book spin-off series in the 50s titled The Lone Ranger's Companion Tonto, and was often depicted as being witty and sarcastic, even going on to mock other less favorable portrayals of himself in pop culture that made him seem more savage. I like when heroic characters are self-aware and sassy like that. I feel it. Deadpool, She-Hulk, Tonto. Keep being sassy, keep being witty. Number 8. Green Lantern. Before Hal Jordan or Guy Gardner, there was Alan Scott. He was the first Green Lantern and was created by Martin Nodell, making his comic book debut in All-American Comics issue 16. When this first Green Lantern made his appearance, he probably seemed to be pretty cool, I'm sure. This was way back when the Green Lantern was still an actual lantern, by the way. It's just this lantern he was carrying around. But in retrospect, Alan Scott is known as being one of the silliest Green Lanterns, because he has one of the strangest weaknesses in comic book history. Wood. While there definitely wouldn't be openly gay superheroes for some time yet since he was introduced in 1940, I like to think the fact that he is helpless against wood might pose a double or symbolic meaning. I'll just let you ponder what you will about that. But that's just me. Either way, the weakness is a hilarious one to see in comics, just villains beating him with wooden clubs and baseball bats, and it would later be fully explained and made semi-logical later on, but still, it's ridiculous. And I love it. Number 7. Black Panther. The leader of Wakanda made his first comic book debut appearance in Fantastic Four issue 52 in 1966. He is often credited with being the first black superhero to appear in comics. The only sad thing is that it took us that long to get one. The 60s! Such a long time in comics, so long. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The first story involving him in the pages of Fantastic Four Volume 1 are pretty hilarious and great. If you haven't read them, you kind of should. They're interesting. Black Panther invites the Fantastic Four to Wakanda. Naive as they are, they accept. But what they don't know is that Black Panther longs to fight them. Of course, while the comic originally seems to be spinning Black Panther as a villain, it is later revealed that he only wanted to test them, and the fighting was merely to prove their merit as he needs their help. In the next issue, issue 53, we learn more about his backstory and why he has sought out the Fantastic Four. We are also introduced even more to the land of Wakanda with its unique combination of new age tech and tradition, old and new. So there you have it. Number 6. Superman. Superman is that hero that you usually think of when someone asks who the oldest superhero is during a trivia night. And honestly, I'm sure it's an acceptable answer by most trivia standards. But not here. Not here. Here we go further. Superman is widely thought of as being one of the oldest, the original American comic book superhero. But seeing as how he is number 6 on this list, I think us mega nerds would likely know otherwise. Still, he came out in 1938 and first debuted in Action Comics number 1. And honestly, if you read his original appearance, it's easy to see what all the hullabaloo is about. It's basically a piece created to show off and introduce just how unstoppable Superman is. In fact, Superman would continue to be presented as near invincible until the 80s, acquiring more and more powers with each appearance. And then we had to fix that. We had to tweak that because it's too much power. Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Number 5. Sheena. Queen of the Jungle. You might be wondering just where Wonder Woman is on this list, but Sheena actually predates Wonder Woman, and her own self-titled series even predates Wonder Woman's by a few months. She was originally published by Fiction Comics and was known as Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Most 1930s Queen of the Jungle I have ever seen, but yet. Sheena's abilities included super strength and agility, and the ability to communicate with animals. She made her first appearance in WAG Comics issue number 1, and her self-titled series came out in early 1942, just a few months before Wonder Woman. Only a few months. So close, so close. Number 4. Kazar. Kazar is known as being one of the first Marvel superheroes. Can you guess who the other one is? Let me know in the comments. But there are actually 2 Kazars. The one I'm referring to here is David Rand. He appeared in Marvel before they were even known as Marvel back when they were Timely Comics in 1936. Kazar shared many similarities with Tarzan and was very passionate about protecting the surrounding wildlife and animals where he grew up. He also fought against Germany with the Allies in World War II, fun fact. In fact, the last story we have of him shows him setting out to provide more wartime aid. The other Kazar we would meet later in the 60s was known as Kevin Reginald, and was the son of the man who discovered Savage Land. Both Kazars also appear to be English. They had an English heritage anyways. Interesting. Number 3. The Phantom. The Phantom originated in comic strip form, where so many superheroes were originally born. He was created by Lee Falk. The Phantom actually introduced the idea of a costumed adventurer to American comic books. Before that, we didn't really have people in like tight spandex running around. While the Phantom, aka Kit Walker, found popularity in comic strips in the US, his comics didn't quite shine so bright. Internationally, however, the character seemed to do much better, becoming a hit in Australia, Sweden, and Papua New Guinea. He also was originally from a fictional country in Africa, so no wonder he did well in Papua New Guinea. I feel like they were like, I can see some similarities here. Number 2. Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers first appeared in a comic strip. He is a hero who comes from a world of sci-fi set in the future of the 2400s. 24,000s? 2400s. Yeah, 2400s. Depending on what medium or comic you're reading, the last 2 digits of that year are also apt to change for his story. He made his comic strip debut as Buck, but the character was originally named Anthony Rogers in the novel that inspired the comics, Armageddon 2419 AD, written by Philip Francis Nolan. The story follows the adventures of a young man who is frozen for almost 500 years in suspended animation before waking up in the future and rediscovering the world he once knew, in a time that he is less familiar with. Honestly, if you aren't aware of Buck Rogers, but you are a fan of cosmic superheroes or sci-fi and weird space adventures, I highly recommend you check this classic out. Also, if you just like some time travel-y stuff. Who doesn't like time travel-y stuff? Everyone is like me, I hate it, but there's a few of us I know that like it. Number 1. Spring-Heeled Jack. Spring-Heeled Jack was originally a character in English folklore and urban legends. His being was reportedly cited all over Great Britain in the 1830s, and the stories involving him inspired writers to use him as a character in both a play and in Penny Dreadful novels, which were short serials, the original comic books really of the time. He has since seen other comic book series dedicated to him as time has progressed. Spring-Heeled Jack was originally described as a gentlemanly looking demon, and later described as looking like the devil himself, complete with horns. He was often known for breathing fire. Whoa, scary stuff. While his character was originally posed as a villain, he later developed into a misunderstood hero, a nobleman who sought to steal from the rich and give to the poor, complete with his own gadgets to help him perform his noble feats. Kinda like Robin Hood meets Batman. That's kinda what he was doing. Meets a guy that looks like a demon. Just combine all those, you got Spring-Heeled Jack. Number 10. Hero for Hire / Power Man. That's right, while Black Panther was one of the first superheroes of color to appear in comics, Luke Cage's Power Man would actually beat him when it came to having his own comic series. This series was originally titled Hero for Hire, but the name would later be changed starting with issue 17 to Power Man. The first issue of Hero for Hire came out in June of 1971, and Black Panther wouldn't get his own series until 1977. I know, strange, right? The name for Luke Cage's series would change one more time starting with issue number 50, becoming Power Man and Iron Fist. That name would stick with the series from issue 86 till its end in issue number 125. Number 9. The Amazing Spider-Man. When many people think of Marvel Comics, this is often the hero they think of first. The first volume of Amazing Spider-Man would see its very first issue come out in March of 1963, and the first issue was very much an origin story, one that we'd become all too familiar with in the animated series and films to follow about everyone's favorite Spidey-themed hero, Peter Parker's Spider-Man. The series would be a long-standing one and would produce hundreds of issues, and although it has been relaunched, the story of Peter Parker continues to be one that comic book fans everywhere have become obsessed with, making Spider-Man one of the biggest superheroes, especially one of the biggest superheroes to come out of Marvel Comics. Number 8. Fantastic Four. The Human Torch was actually the first character to appear from the Fantastic Four in Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939. Sort of anyways. Marvel Comics was an anthology magazine comprised of various heroes' adventure shorts. I know, I said no anthologies, but I think this is a pretty cool fact. The Human Torch that actually first appeared in Marvel Comics was actually Jim Hammond. Hammond would later be reinvented in the Fantastic Four team as Johnny Storm, Sue's brother, so the character, while different, is even older than the Fantastic Four comics itself, which is still pretty old, although granted that Human Torch wasn't obviously the same as the Human Torch that we have now. The Fantastic Four series started in 1961 with issue 1, which like Spider-Man's start was also an origin story. Watch out for those cosmic rays, or maybe don't if you want superpowers. Number 7. The Flash. Starting us off with Barry Allen's Flash, this series had hundreds of issues as well, though not quite as many as the Amazing Spider-Man series. It all started in March of 1959 with issue 105. While that might seem like an odd number to start on, it was because the series was picked up by DC Comics after All American Publications cancelled its predecessor, a series known as Flash Comics, which featured predominantly the adventures of the Flash and Hawkman. DC Comics actually was kind of once All American Publications. DC was the phoenix that rose out of the ashes of a few different comic book publishers who came together to create DC, of which All American was one. And then later, that original Flash 2 from Flash Comics, Jay Garrick, would also become part of our continuity. Fun fact. Jay Garrick was one of the few Flashes that actually got to retire. supposed to die, or go back into the Speed Force, or any of that fun stuff. Number 6. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman would get her own series in 1942, shortly after her appearance in All-Star Comics issue number 8. The first issue even introduced a female associate editor of the magazine, Alice Marble. Marble was known as an acclaimed tennis player. While her time on the DC staff editorial board was brief, she was also a self-proclaimed fan of Wonder Woman, who was responsible during her time with DC for the Wonder Woman of History feature in the comic, which retold the stories of real-life famous historical women. Wonder Woman's first story involved her saving Steve Trevor, and introduced us to the world of the Amazons. Apparently, Amazons liked riding kangaroos around originally. Did you know that? At least they look like kangaroos, I don't know. Giant kangaroos, we ride them in combat. I wonder when horses became a thing in these comics. I need to read more old Wonder Woman, because it seems like a time. Number 5. Green Lantern. This comic was originally published by National Periodical Publications, who, as we know now, would later become one of the companies that would amalgamate into DC Comics. The series would run for 38 issues, and would introduce the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. One of my favorites to bring up, because I get to talk about his weakness to wood. In this first issue, we would discover how Alan got his powers from both the Green Lantern ring and an actual Green Lantern, which was created by an old Chinese lamp maker from molten green space metal that had crashed to Earth via meteor. This original series really put the lantern in Green Lantern. It's not even a funny joke, it's just really bad. You're welcome. Number 4. Captain Marvel Adventures. Captain Marvel Adventures was the spin-off from Whiz Comics, an anthology series that featured the ever-popular Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel Adventures was the original series for the hero, produced by Fawcett Publications. Alright, let's get into the craziness of Fawcett, here we go. Fawcett would end up cancelling the series and all other superhero series eventually as a result of the lawsuit filed against them in regards to Captain Marvel's similarity to Superman, who had belonged to National Periodical Publications at the time the lawsuit was filed in the 1940s. Still, Captain Marvel Adventures would go on to have 150 issues before it was cancelled in the 1950s. National Periodical Publication would later evolve and merge into the famous comic book publisher that we know today as DC Comics. And as Fawcett was closing up shop, DC would end up picking up the rights for Captain Marvel, aka Billy Batson, in the 1970s. Captain Marvel under DC would eventually evolve to become Shazam, originally the name of the magician who gave Billy his powers in his origin story in Whiz Comics. Although later that magician would have a different name, have no name, all sorts of crazy stuff. The name change happened after Marvel Comics sued DC for rights to the name in regards to their own separate Captain Marvel, who first appeared in the Marvel Superhero series in 1967. Oh, comic book characters and lawsuits. Woo! I hope that clarified some of that crazy lawsuit stuff for you, or made it more confusing. Either way, I hope you learned something. Number 3. Captain America Comics. Captain America was one of the first Marvel heroes to get his own series. Captain America Comics was the original name of the series, and its first issue came out in March of 1941. Unsurprisingly, the cover features Cap punching Hitler in the face, pretty much establishing what kind of hero Steve Rogers would be from day one. The kind of guy that likes to punch Nazis in the face. That's his thing. That was his thing anyways. Then he got frozen in some ice, then he woke up, did some other stuff. You know how it goes. Number 2. Batman. After making his first appearance in the Detective Comics series in issue 27, Batman would shortly after get his own series and go on to be one of the most iconic heroes in comic book history, and obviously one of my favorites. The first issue of Batman came out in March of 1940. It featured an origin story and introduced us to Batman characters who would go on to become some of the most famous, including Robin, James Gordon, Joe Chill, Hugo Strange, Catwoman, and Batman's one true supervillain, the Joker. Number 1. Superman. Superman first appeared in the anthology series Action Comics, and like Batman, he would soon after get a series to call his own. Superman Volume 1 Issue 1 would come out in June of 1939, almost a full year before his future BFF and fellow JLA member Batman. Superman's first issue was the typical origin story fare, but as soon as issue 2, we would also find ourselves introduced to some of Superman's mainstays, mostly in the way of supporting characters. In issue 2, we would meet both Superman's young pal Jimmy Olsen and his future girlfriend slash wife slash baby mama Lois Lane. Slash sometimes she's superwoman herself. That's also happened. Oh, Lois Lane. She's a pretty cool lady.
Number 10. Wolverine. Yes, Wolverine has been a member of the Avengers, but at this point, I mean, who hasn't? Between honorary membership and various teams, they've accepted many people. While Wolverine was a full-fledged member, he was one of the new Avengers who joined in 2005, and from there on in would find some form of affiliation, say such as with the Savage Avengers. Wolverine, aka James Howlett, is quite long-lived. He made it onto the list of oldest mutants as well. Wolverine was allegedly born in 1832 or 1886, depending upon which comic you're reading, because Wolverine's history shifts to the point that it's actually a bit of a joke. Some other publications clock him at over 200. The point is, he's old. He's older than Cap. So we have his mutant abilities to thank for this. They allow him to age at a slower pace than most people thanks to his healing factor. His cells regenerate at a much faster rate, keeping them younger and healthier than the natural slow march of time. Number 9. Captain America. Starting off with one of the younger members on the list, Captain America. Captain America's age comes from the time that he spent frozen in ice. So he is physically still pretty young, but if you count all the frozen years, he's over 100 years old. And yes, that counts. Kinda like being born on a leap year, but not really. How old are you? Captain America is one of the earliest members of the Avengers, but not one of the founders. No, the group was already founded when he was located frozen in ice. So he was a new recruit, but he became such a presence that he's often associated with the founding, and as a leader of the team. So Cap enjoys a position of high standing, and you can always pull out some "he's old" jokes in case you need or want them, which the MCU did in abundance. Capsicle ahoy! Number 8. The Sentry. The Sentry is Robert Reynolds, and based on his backstory, he is older than the rest of the Avengers. He is positioned as a Superman-style hero for Marvel, appearing and launching a golden era in a way that happened for DC but not for Marvel, because Marvel wasn't Marvel until the 60s. Before that, they were Timely and Atlas. Hence, this Sentry was there before the rise of the Age of Heroes such as Cap and Namor, who were the Golden Age heroes of Marvel, and he was firmly established by the Renaissance, aka the time of the Fantastic Four, based upon this retroactive canon. The Sentry seemingly doesn't age because of the serum that was the catalyst for him receiving his powers, which also triggered a photosynthetic response that causes him to not only absorb solar energy, but moved his molecules a tenth of a second ahead in time, which causes him to be immensely powerful for reasons. The Sentry, once he was established in canon, earns a place as one of the oldest Avengers. He joined the team in the New Avengers in 2005. Number 7. Namor. Why yes, the Submariner Imperious Rex has been on the Avengers. He joined in the 1980s in issue 262. Good old Namor Mackenzie. Once you know that's his name, you can't stop saying it. Namor also made our oldest mutants list because for a time he was called the First Mutant, a title he has since lost as he is not really a mutant at all but instead a hybrid. Namor was born around 1916 as a way to account for him being a Golden Age hero but still around the Silver Age and Modern Age. He ages slowly. As mentioned, he was one of the Golden Age heroes for Marvel, and he made that transference over in the Renaissance when he was reintroduced in the Fantastic Four. But of course, the old continuity was still canon as well, so he is over 100 years old. And he's not on like the reputable Avengers team all the time, he gets to be on the Illuminati too, and cause the Skrull invasion. Number 6. Conan the Barbarian. Conan is a recent addition to the Savage Avengers in 2019, and has been there since the first issue. 10,000 BC, that is the era when Conan is supposed to be taking place during a fictional era, but the Avengers is a fictional team, so hey, it counts. Conan was transported forward in time by a spell to be on this team of Avengers, and some would say that doesn't count, but here on Top 10 Nerd, that makes him ancient. This isn't the only time Conan has been brought forward in the Marvel canon either. It usually happens in what-if stories. There's a story where he becomes a pimp, kinda. So you can have those fun culture shock moments. I mean, if him being a pimp is fun. Venom is also on this team of Avengers too. He's old, well the symbiote is. Number 5. Star Fox. Star Fox is a member of the Eternals, a race who is an offshoot of the evolutionary process that would create life on Earth. The Eternals are an extremely long-lived race who are viewed essentially as immortal. Star Fox is the brother of Thanos, and he was recruited to the Avengers in the 1980s. His first appearance as a member was in issue 243, but he was a member in training since issue 232. Eros, aka Star Fox, would be on the team without much fanfare until he was accused of sexual assault. Now we've talked about this many times in this channel, and some of you are like, why do you keep bringing it up? Well, it's cause unless you were really tracking Star Fox, like you're a big Star Fox fan, that is the most significant thing to happen to him in many people's minds. And for some, that arc, he's never really recovered from from it. Number 4. Gilgamesh, the Forgotten One. Let's continue on down this path of Eternals. He got to be on the Avengers at a time when the roster was nearly empty. He joined in Avengers issue number 300 in 1989. It was at this point that he properly took on the name Gilgamesh and updated his costume. He then also took the mantle of Monster Hunter. He would assist them firstly until it appeared to his death in 391, and then he would officially leave when his essence was bound to Olympus. Some people afraid he was on the team, which works because of his name, the Forgotten One. Number 3. Sersi. Sersi joined the Avengers in issue 314 in 1990. Captain America had already met Sersi a couple of times, once through time travel and then because she would become friends with some of the Avengers, as Sersi grew quite attached to her time as a human during the time when the Eternals had lost their memory. He would ask her for her help and she would eagerly agree because she had a crush on Cap and was often seen flirting with him. It was after she had helped out the Avengers that she would be asked to join. This was again during their quest for members, as she was an ideal choice as she had already worked with them. She would prove to be a great asset to the team, but Cap would consistently find himself embarrassed by her flirting with him. However, over time she would become more and more aggressive. Sersi, like Gilgamesh and Star Fox, is an Eternal. So, long-lived. It's part of the pedigree. She is said to have been born during the Ice Age. Number 2. Thor, the god of thunder, currently the Herald of Thunder at the time of this recording. He is of course one of the Asgardian gods. Thor has lived for millennia, long enough to become ensconced in myth. He is at least as old as man, probably older. The Asgardians live in another realm and age much slower than humans, not only as a result of their physiology, but as a result of the golden apples of Idun they eat to prolong their lives. He would end up joining the Avengers after he was cast to Earth by his father Odin. For a time he had a human form as well, that of Donald Blake. Despite this, he is one of the founding members of the Avengers as one of the key players in Marvel's Renaissance, at the start of the Silver Age. Number 1. Valkyrie. Valkyrie joined the team during what's called the Heroic Age of Recruits, and first appeared as an Avenger in Secret Avengers Volume 1 in 2010. It was revealed to be the original Brunhild, which it matters. Valkyrie is of course based off of the Valkyries of Norse mythology, and firmly planted within Thor's universe. Brunhild is seemingly older than Thor, as she was selected for Valhalla by Odin before the Thunder God makes his appearance. This makes her one of the oldest Avengers. She also has a pretty confusing history involving multiple identities, some time being taken over by the Enchantress, being split into multiple people, and the like.
Number 10. Venom. Venom would technically make its first appearance in issue 252 of volume 1 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, but it wouldn't be until almost 50 issues later in issue 299 that the suit would develop a mind of its own, or well, bind its own mind with that of Eddie Brock's mind, and be introduced to us again as Venom. Once Eddie had got his hands on the suit, he began to plot sweet, sweet revenge on Peter Parker. But during his first appearance, Peter, who was also rocking a black and white suit at the time, albeit not the symbiotic one, I know, confusing, was not at home, so instead, Venom ran into MJ in her and Peter's apartment, scaring her senseless. Eddie would go on to terrorize Peter, but the two would at times reluctantly team up to take on even bigger bads, as despite being kind of a bad guy, Eddie had sort of a moral code. He definitely didn't like to kill innocent civilians and tried to avoid that when possible, though also he sometimes did that. The two teamed up to take on villains like Carnage, and eventually Eddie would become a hero in his own right. He's probably got one of the best story arcs in comics because of his gradual transformation since his introduction as Venom in '88, from complete villain to, well, complete anti-hero. Maybe even like full-on hero now. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Venom a full hero yet? Can we go there? Number 9. Helena Wayne as Huntress. Before Helena Bertinelli was Huntress, we had Helena Wayne. Helena Wayne was the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, Batman and Catwoman respectively. Although she didn't come from a crime family, she was still heavily trained by her parents, and eventually took up the mantle Huntress as a vigilante. Like the main continuity Huntress, she was also known for being more violent than was considered acceptable. After her mother's death, she moved out and blaming the criminal Silky Cernak for her mother's death, as he had blackmailed Selina into returning to a life of crime as Catwoman. Helena Wayne set out for revenge. Catwoman died when she returned to her life of crime. No. Mom, why? Number 8. John Constantine. Constantine made his first appearance in Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 37. He is known as an occult detective from England who likes to do things his own way. He's somewhat violent and reckless, with somewhat of a disregard for the smaller things. To John, sometimes you have to break a few eggs or sacrifice a few souls to make an omelet. And as long as it's for the greater good, he's sometimes fine with that. In his own series Hellblazer, which started in 1988 and ran for over 300 issues, the original tone of the series was quite dark, because the series also came out as part of DC's Vertigo line, which was known for being one of the darkest imprints that DC ever had. Of course, sadly, Vertigo is no more, but in its place, we now have the stunning DC Black Label, so I guess it's fine. Just kidding. DC Black Label's really awesome. But still, can't we have both? Can't we have both DC? Number 7. V. V comes to us from Alan Moore and David Lloyd's series V for Vendetta. He's a mysterious character who is also known as Patient Number 5, who is said to be one of the many victims of abuse in a resettlement camp run by the fascist and villainous Norsefire-ruled government. It is believed that V was a test subject at the camp who escaped. He then adopted the mantle V and began to work on building an anarchistic uprising to topple the oppressive regime. His methods were meant to appear morally ambiguous so that readers could decide how to see him, as a hero or as a madman. V made his first appearance in the series Warrior in issue number 1. Also, if you haven't checked out that little story that he's in Warrior, V for Vendetta, it's really great. Just saying. Also, the series is great. Number 6. Black Cat. Black Cat was first introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 issue 194 as a thief, and she continued to be that for quite a while. But she was also introduced as a love interest for Spider-Man at the same time, which she would also continue to be for some time. Distracting Spidey with a kiss, she was able to get away with the goods she needed and succeeded in breaking her dad out of jail as a result. Though we wouldn't learn her dad's connection to her until the next issue. Being a mysterious figure with self-serving motives has always left her painted as an anti-hero, even when she has heroic intentions at heart. Although Felicia Hardy has played both sides before as well, being a full-on hero and a full-on criminal at times. Number 5. Punisher. Probably one of the most iconic when it comes to the idea of what an anti-hero is. Frank Castle was also one of the first. It's likely because of him as well that the idea of seeking revenge became a somewhat dark one. The Punisher's main quest is to get vengeance, not just for himself, but for others whom he thinks deserve it. Originally, he turned to a life of vigilantism after the death of his family, who happened to be on a picnic at the wrong place, the wrong time, and were witnesses to something they shouldn't have been. As such, they were eliminated by the mob. Despite also being shot, Frank survived the attack, though the rest of his family died, and as a result, he swore revenge. He is also known for being an overly violent hero who fights with guns, which is something most heroes look down upon, preferring to use non-lethal force. The Punisher would achieve next-level anti-hero status when he also became the first anti-hero to kill the entire Marvel Universe in 1995, in Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, paving the way for another popular anti-hero, Deadpool, to also do so years later. Of course, it would take Deadpool until the 2000s before that would even be a thing for him. The 2010s, as it were, actually. Number 4. Wolverine. Logan, being considered a little more rough around the edges and animalistic, is what quickly granted him an anti-hero status. As far as superheroes go, he was different. He made his first full appearance in The Incredible Hulk Volume 1 issue 181. Since the beginning, his violent nature and broodiness has made him both well-loved by fans, but sometimes disliked by other heroes. He also has less hang-ups when it comes to killing people, even suggesting at times that it's the best course of action when dealing with villains, and having a pretty big thing for mercy killing when it comes to other heroes. This has also made Logan one of the biggest anti-heroes in the X-Men world. He just kills tons of people. People will be like, I think I'm gonna die, and he's like, I got you, don't worry. I'll make it quick. Number 3. Magneto. Magneto has been known as the foil to X-Men's Professor Xavier for years. Xavier was also the leader of the X-Men, while Magneto was the leader of the first Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who were often the X-Men's enemies. Still, Magneto does what he does often to make the life of mutants better, albeit through punishing humanity, which, you know, not so great. And while he has spent a lot of time being a villain, over the years he has definitely shifted more to anti-hero, especially in the new Dawn of X mutant relaunch, where he often works alongside Charles. Although Charles is always like, calm down, man. And he's like, no! I will slightly overreact, because I'm Magneto, and that's what I do. Number 2. Catwoman. Catwoman has always operated more on the edge of what's right and wrong since her introduction, which is part of the huge appeal when it comes to her, and has been part of a huge problem in regards to her on and off again relationship with Batman. Though Batman wasn't really a saint either when it came to his early days, but anyways. When Catwoman first appeared in Batman Volume 1 issue number 1, it was as a jewel thief, and Batman at the time was engaged to a woman named Julie. Still, he was tempted to join her and become her king of crime, but when he refused her, she managed to escape his clutches, sneaking away. Batman really hoped that he'd run into her again, despite her criminal tendencies, and despite the fact that he was engaged, and his wish would eventually be granted. Catwoman Robin would even team up with Batman and join him in his acts of heroism, though originally it would often be for her own motives alone, but she became more of a hero as time went on. Number 1. Namor. Namor is an interesting one. When he first debuted in Motion Picture Funnies Weekly, it was as a young prince attacking land dwellers, seeking revenge for his people. He would then go on to join the fight in World War II, fighting against Nazis with heroes such as Captain America. Later, he would forget who he was and only regain his memories when he was accidentally knocked into the ocean in the original Fantastic Four series by Johnny Storm. He would then rediscover who he was and that the kingdom that had been his underwater home had been destroyed by the Humans' War's nuclear bomb tests, and as a result would attack the land, becoming a villain. Again. Since then, he has done a variety of good and not always so good things, but what remains constant is that Namor's methods have pretty much always been questionable. His return to being good, but in his own way, and still while thinking very highly of himself, made him an anti-hero. And while he is very passionate about protecting his people, there is no doubt that this means he would also do anything to safeguard Atlantis, regardless of how morally ambiguous or severe it might be.